So it's a great pleasure, indeed it's a great honor for the Observatorio Cervantes at Harvard to hold this event, this very special event here this evening in honor of one of Spain's greatest, probably most prolific, most international composers. So we are very grateful to Isabel Pérez Dobarro for having invited us to support this series of events that she and the professors and artists who are present here today have been holding in the past few weeks, so I've understood, in several universities and institutions in New York in honor of Joaquín Rodrigo. So special thanks go to Walter Clark, Antoni Pizà, Douglas Rivers, and Javier Suárez-Pajares, and also to the art performers, Antoni and Hermelindo Ruiz, who have just left, for making all this possible. I'm sure we are all going to enjoy this very, very special event for us. It's really a very special event for us in the Observatorio. And as you know, the event will include a discussion about Rodrigo's life and works, and it'll end, as was probably expected, with a performance of his music, of Rodrigo's music, by these two very, very excellent performers. So Isabel and our guests have the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's indeed a great Well, it is indeed a great honor for all of us to be here, and I'm especially grateful to you, Marta and Victoria, for hosting this event, for making this event possible. I'm studying international relations here, but I'm also a classical pianist, and since I was very, very young, since I started playing at the age of 3, the piano music of Joaquín Rodrigo was very special to me. It truly moved me. And I grew up listening not only to the very famous Concierto de Aranjuez that we will discuss later on, but also to his extraordinary piano pieces. And I was also blessed to know that Rodrigo's family, also from a quite early age, through the courses of Música en Compostela, an international festival that happens in Spain, has been happening for the last 62 years, in which Rodrigo taught, and now his son-in-law, Leonara, is the director. And therefore, considering the special occasion of the 20th anniversary of his death, I connected with Riva, with Antoni Pizà, and we started working on a festival that will serve as an homage to his works. Of course, his most well-known work, the Concierto de Aranjuez for guitar and orchestra, but also others that didn't get to be played as often, and certainly they deserve to be played and to be known. For sure, as you said very well, Joaquín Rodrigo is one of the most important Spanish composer of the 20th century, or at least among the 3 most important. But not only for Spain, I would argue that at the international realm, he's one of the most relevant composers. So in this panel, we will first listen to some of his works by 2 of the greatest performers that we have in the United States of his music. Antoni, an extraordinary mezzo-soprano who has sung the major roles, both in opera, a lead, you have seen her in Carmen, but also in Rossini. She has a great CD which she recorded a couple of years ago about the Italian composer, and she's also a specialist on Spanish music. And we will also listen to Hermelindo Ruiz Mestre, guitarist and composer from Puerto Rico, who recently recorded the Concierto de Aranjuez live for NBC. So 2 extraordinary musicians that are going to play for us a selection of works. First of all, 2 pieces for voice and guitar. The first one is En Jerez de la Frontera, a piece that Rodrigo composed with Manuel de Falla, the other great Spanish composer in mind. So you're going to see that the topic is very similar to the El Corregidor y la Molinera, Sobre el Respico, sorry. So the story of El Corregidor y la Molinera. Later we're going to listen to one of the Sephardic pieces, Morena Me Llaman. So based on this Sephardic text, Joaquín Rodrigo composed this collection of 4 pieces. This is one of them, Morena Me Llaman. With all of you, Antoni and Hermelindo Ruiz Mestre. Solo. The Concierto Aranjuez was composed between 38 until 1940 when it was premiered, and it became very soon the greatest or the most well-known piece by Rodrigo all over the world. In this case, we're going to listen both to this arrangement of the first movement, but also to a later arrangement that the own composer did called Aranjuez más Pensé, in which he arranged the second movement for voice and guitar, with lyrics by his wife, the great pianist Victoria Camille. Now, let's watch a video of the composer speaking about how the Concierto Aranjuez came about in his mind, and what inspired him to compose this great piece. Now the arrangement of the second movement with madness. Thank you so much for such a beautiful performance. So we'll move now to the panel discussion, and to introduce our conversation today we have Dr. Pizà, Director of the Foundation for Iberian Music at the Barry S. Witt Center for Music Research and Documentation at the Graduate Center in City University of New York. He has taught music history at Hofstra University, City College, John Jay College of the City University of New York, and the Conservatorio Superior de Música y Danza de Illes Baleares. He's a member of the editorial board of Music and Art, Catalan Review, Papeles de la Música de Cádiz, and Itamar. And his interests include Spanish and Latin American music, as well as biographical studies and criticism. So thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for this nice introduction. Let me just tell you a little story. Like 3 years ago or so, Isabel came to me and to Dr. Douglas Riva, and she said, shouldn't we put together a festival to celebrate the life and music of Joaquín Rodrigo? And I said, well, I think this is a very, very good idea. So in the last 3 years, Isabel, Douglas, and myself, we've been putting together a few events, including this one. And I think the reason why I wanted to be involved from my position in New York as director of the Foundation for Iberian Music at the City University The main reason is because I thought it was time, it was overdue actually, that there was such a festival from an academic and also from a general audience perspective, but dedicated to Joaquín Rodrigo. I think that Joaquín Rodrigo has been neglected from the academic world. The audience, of course, always loved Rodrigo, you know, but I think what this series of events, including this one, and by the way, I'm very thankful to the Observatorio and to Marta and her whole team for hosting this event. So thank you so much. I think that, as I was saying, I think it's the right time because there is so much to say about Joaquín Rodrigo. I think there is such a relevant composer. Nowadays in the academic world we talk about disability studies and disability in music. We know that Joaquín Rodrigo was blind since the age of 3. We talk about nationalism and regionalism. We know Joaquín Rodrigo did a lot of Valencian songs, folk Spanish music, including Sephardic songs too. The issue of modernism, you know, the avant-garde. You know, there is a debate about that, whether Joaquín Rodrigo should have been more avant-garde. As a matter of fact, I think that some people will point out here that he was avant-garde, and eventually maybe not so much. Anyway, so he's a very relevant composer. That's why I'm very happy to be involved with this. I'm just going to say a few more words to introduce the rest of the panel. To my right, the eminent musicologist, distinguished professor of musicology at UCLA, University of California at Riverside.
Well, but I got my doctorate at UCLA,
Yes.
so you're right.
Walter Clark. Of course, his resume, his CV as a musicologist is like, it would fill the whole hour. But let me just say one thing. If there is one book that you want to read about Spanish music, you must read his biography of Isaac Albéniz. You know, that's a seminal work, you know, seminal work. There are many more books and editions of music, but this is one thing. Continuing to my right, Dr. Douglas Riva. Again, if you ever need to listen to the music of Enrique Granados, you need to listen to his recordings. Award-winning pianist and recording artist, Douglas Riva. He obtained his PhD from New York University, which you are a student at New York University, and as well as you're a student here, right? Too. So. So there is like this tradition, I guess, of Hispanicism at NYU, New York University. He's also the author of the critical edition of Enrique Granados' piano works. And continuing to my right, Professor Javier Suárez-Pajares. He's a professor of music and musicology at the Universidad Complutense de Madrid. He specializes, among other things, but some of his specialties are guitar music. He's a guitarist, and he has written extensively about the guitar and the guitar repertoire. He's written about the bolero, the music of the bolero and the dance, and he's written about many more things. And of course, he's written at least 3 books about Joaquín Rodrigo. And he is in the process of writing what we think is going to be the definite biography of Joaquín Rodrigo, co-authored with Professor Clark here. And finally, I'm very, very thankful. I know that all of us are very thankful to Isabel. As I said, officially, you know, Isabel came to Douglas, Riva, and me to organize this series of events, but she is the soul of this festival. She's done most of the work, and she has done it tremendously, you know. So Isabel is, if they always say women know how to multitask, well, that's you know, Isabel is a pianist, concert pianist. Isabel is doing a PhD in musicology at New York University, a degree in international studies here at Harvard. She has organized most of the events for this festival. So thank you so much, Isabel, for giving us the honor, especially Douglas and I, to share with you, the co-organization of this. But again, you've been the soul. You are the soul of this festival. But without any further ado, we can now listen to the panelists. And I apologize for taking maybe a few extra minutes from their time. Fantastic performers.
Thank you so much for your words, and you know how important the both of you have been in this organization of this festival, how much have we talked about it and worked on it, and I'm extremely grateful to your support on this, so thank you so much. And we will also talk about another very important pillar of this festival, who is Cecilia Rodrigo, the daughter of Joaquín Rodrigo, and Ediciones Joaquín Rodrigo, which is the publishing and the foundation of Joaquín Rodrigo back in Spain. So she cannot be with us today, but she wanted to record a message for all of you. So we're going to listen to those greetings from Cecilia Rodrigo to all of us.
Dear friends, greetings from sunny Spain. It's a great pleasure to address you this message, even if reading not only as daughter of the composer Joaquín Rodrigo, but as his agent, publisher and president of the Victoria Joaquín Rodrigo Foundation. The combined efforts of the publishing house and the foundation as a family holding have obtained magnificent results in our task of furthering the legacy of Joaquín Rodrigo and his wife, and constitute a unique management experience in the world of culture. It's my pleasure to let you know that the United States has played a major role in the career of the composer along 60 years. The fact that about 6 major symphonic works were premiered in your country is eloquent in itself. Also, I must refer to Joaquín Rodrigo's academic experience as a professor of history of music at the University of Madrid for 30 years, as a guest professor at the University of Puerto Rico in 1963, and to his honorary degree, Doctor Honoris Causa, from the University of Southern California. As I have not been able to attend personally the panel discussion at the prestigious Cervantes Observatory at Harvard University, let me express my deepest gratitude to the musical personalities participating in this event and to all professors and students attending. Nothing could be more rewarding to me than Joaquín Rodrigo's presence among you all today.
So let's talk a little bit about Joaquín Rodrigo's biography, his early steps as a composer, which took place in Paris, actually, in the 1930s. Maybe Mr. Suárez-Pajares can tell us a little bit more about this early period, early compositional period, and his influences, and also how he impacted other composers of the time.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Yes, Joaquín Rodrigo started to be known in Paris in the 30s, and then more widely in the 40s. He had started to compose, however, in the 20s, but then he was scarcely known outside his most intimate circles in Valencia. However, some of his very first works, such as the Suite for Piano, his second orchestral piece, 5 children pieces, and as well as his signature piece, which was the prelude to the Don Cockerell, Preludio Adagio Mañanero, written in 1926. They all were masterworks that revealed the genius of the young Rodrigo. The genius, but also his most convinced aesthetical inclination towards the French avant-garde, and especially the exploration of the limits of tonal language through bitonality, the simultaneous use of two different keys. Let me show you the beginning and the end of the prelude to the Don Cockerell as one of the most, I think, the most successful pieces ever written within this bitonal harmony. Throughout the whole piece, the pianist is playing with each hand in a different key. G major on the right hand and F sharp major on the left hand, which means that most of the time right hand is playing the white keys of the keyboard of the piano, while the left hand is playing mostly the black keys on the piano. As a result, the piece is highly dissonant, and a comic effect that he was looking for is fully achieved. It was, for years, as I said, the signature piece for Rodrigo, and we are going to listen to his own performance in this recording. Quite surprising, I suppose, if you just expected the sound and the world of Concierto de Aranjuez. In 1927, Rodrigo moved to Paris. During the next 5 years, he added very few new pieces to his catalog and was mainly engaged in studying orchestration with Paul Dicas, as well as attending concerts on a daily basis and listening to all kinds of music. Hindemith, Honegger, Schoenberg, all the music, of course, Ravel and all the French young composers of the group of the six, all of them. He didn't miss a single concert during these 5 or more years that he spent in Paris. He was looking for his own voice, for his own style. It is interesting, very interesting, I think, to highlight how fast he abandoned his previous international avant-garde style and embraced a more local kind of music with a remarkable Spanish flavor, something that I would like to call a Spanishness a la francese, or in a French fashion. Orchestral pieces such as the prelude to the poem of La Alhambra, or to a poem to La Alhambra, 1928, and 2 Andalusian miniatures, 1929, exemplify this change of Rodrigo's style. Let us listen to the end of the first of his Andalusian miniatures and the beginning of the second one, where we can see, or we'll be able to see the influence of Manuel de Falla, whom Rodrigo had met in Paris in 1928. So next year he wrote these little pieces for a string orchestra. we're getting close to the, or closer to the, to what we expect, we would expect of from Rodrigo, I think, but not yet, not yet. Until 1933, Rodrigo's life was quite easy. He did what he wanted without caring about anything. He didn't even care if his music liked or disliked, and his parents financed all his whims and without any problem. But suddenly, everything changed. He married, and his father went bankrupt. So in 1934, for the first time, he had to compose to earn his living. It was then, exactly then, when he achieved his own style. The one that would climb the Olympian heights thanks to the Concierto de Aranjuez. His symphonic poem Per la flor del lili blau, written in 1934, is the finest example of this original new style. I would like you to listen to the fanfare that opened this poem and then introduce the first theme of the work, and to realize how or to what extent this theme somehow precludes the famous adagio of Concierto de Aranjuez. Here it is. So we can conclude that Paris was both a point of reference for Rodrigo's aesthetic as approach to composition, as well as a crucial crossroad in his career as a composer. In the last piece, he incorporates all the things that we have seen what he was doing. I mean, for instance, the bitonal or the polytonal clusters in the fanfare, the dissonance, the use of dissonance, and finally this melody or melodism that really precludes, I think, the Concierto de Aranjuez. That has to do with the Spanish history of the historical music, the world of 16th and 17th century that he was studying, as well as technical composition in Paris, because he attended to a lot of classes as well, of lectures of history of music in the Conservatoire. I think that's what we can conclude in this introduction of his language.
Very good.
So one of the main features of Joaquín Rodrigo, as you said very well, was that he was a blind composer, and this is something that we have to take into account, both analyzing his music, but also the process of composition of his works. Nowadays, we're used to see Stevie Wonder, for example, right? But in the classical music realm, we're probably not that used to see a blind composer. I would argue that he's the only major composer who was blind. So I want to show you a video about the process of composition of his works. How did that happen? How did Rodrigo compose his pieces? Here we have a video of him with his copyist working on a piece. So, for those of you who are musicians or read music, how much do you think it was composed right now? Like 20 measures, 1 measure, half of a measure?
Well,
just one measure. So all this work was just for one measure. What about that?
And he didn't finish the full orchestra either.
And he didn't finish the full orchestration.
no.
So you can see the amount of work that was involved.
It's amazing. After he finished the dictation of this work, which was his last concierto for guitar and orchestra, the Concierto para una Fiesta, which was premiered in the United States, he fell in a very dangerous for his health depression. He almost died, not only because of this work, but it was his last creative effort, or the last creative effort that he could do, and it's amazing. How difficult it was for him, and how much he did. It's difficult to understand. All these notes that we saw in the first part of the video, he was taking when he was 87. Then he was, when he did his last effort in composing music, was 82 years old. But in the first part of the video, he was 89 or 87, and all these notes that he took, we don't know what he wrote. He took a lot of notes, and maybe he composed little pieces or something like that, but we don't know. And we don't know still many of because we have not been able to study his manuscripts. His manuscript, I mean the braille writing.
So I think that's a great point, how prolific he
mystery.
was, considering the amount of work that it took doing each of these pieces. A very important person in all this process was his wife, Victoria Camille. She was an extraordinary pianist. She was Turkish, from a Sephardic heritage. They met in Paris in the 29, and they married, as you said very well, on the year 33. And she was a great support, not only performing his works, but also collaborating in this creative process. We're going to see a video of this collaboration, actually. So as we see, it's not merely a collaboration, but actually the creative effort was carried by both of them. Now, of course, the festival itself is called the Guitar and Beyond, and we want to talk about the Concierto de Aranjuez and other pieces, but of course we need to focus on the Concierto de Aranjuez a great deal, because it's his most well-known piece. We listen what an extraordinary work it is, and I would like to ask you, Dr. Clark, precisely about this, about the Concierto de Aranjuez, the impact that it had, and the influence that it has even today.
Well, that's a very good question. You know, when I watch this video of him composing, the words "Triumph des Willens" come to mind, the triumph of the will. Just imagine the titanic willpower that it required to overcome these several obstacles in his way to creating a major work for orchestra in particular. But when I think of that, when you watch him, when you hear him talking, there isn't any sense of strain or struggle. He has a very good sense of humor. So I'm thinking of something else that Mozart said when someone asked him about his composing. He said, I compose the way a sow, all right, I'll say it, pisses, urinates. Pissen in German isn't quite so bad a word as in English. But he said, that's how I compose. In other words, effortlessly. It just flows from me. I always have music in my head, and I can just write it out. And this is a characteristic of great composers. The music is up there. And it's simply the act of putting it down on paper so that others can make it a reality. And I think that Rodrigo was very much that way. There was constantly music in his head. And it was simply a matter of overcoming these obstacles to making it a reality. Now, the Concierto de Aranjuez by Rodrigo is his best known work, clearly. And it was composed 38-39, premiered in Barcelona in 1940, right after the Spanish Civil War, and made a positive impression. It was quite unique, really. It was the first major guitar concerto in the modern era by a modern composer, and inspired others to follow his example, and he would follow that with several concertos thereafter for the guitar and other instruments. But the net effect has been that this work is so popular it tends to put in the shade, to occlude, to obscure all of the other music, and the really great music that he composed. One thing I thought we could look at was, in 1958 in Los Angeles, Miles Davis heard a recording by Narciso Yepes, a great guitarist, of this concerto, and he was immediately taken with it. Now, this was the era of cool jazz, and there was a close relationship between cool jazz and classical music. Many of the cool jazz artists had been trained in classical music, and he was immediately taken with this work and determined to make an arrangement of the middle movement, which he did, and it came out on his album Sketches of Spain, which won an award in 1960. And that really vaulted Rodrigo to a level of celebrity that few classical composers achieve. I told this story the other day, I'll tell it again. When I tell people that I'm writing a book about, with my distinguished co-author here, about Joaquín Rodrigo, I just get blank stares. Who's that? Well, then I'll say, well, he's this guy. Da-da-da, da-da-da-da, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Oh, that guy, really? Oh, okay, yeah, okay, so they get that. This is like a meme that's gone viral, and the whole world recognizes it. It's been used in movies. A couple of years ago, I was watching a movie on television called Happy Feet. It's an animated feature about penguins. This penguin climbs up a hill covered with snow, and he's going to sing, I did it my way, but how does he start his song? The penguin starts his song with, ya-da-da-da-da-da-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. I did it my way. And my jaw just hit the floor. I mean, when you compose something that makes its way into a penguin cartoon, you're up there with da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum-dum, or ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-ba-bum. These are some of the most famous memes in the history of classical music. It's been used in commercials. Years ago, there was a commercial for the Cordoba automobile with Ricardo Montalban as the pitchman, and Ángel Romero playing an arrangement of the Aranjuez in the background. And there are numerous other examples one could cite, but this has made its way into the warp and weave of popular culture on a global scale. It's really quite remarkable. Let's listen to this, though. This is what started it all. This is really what transformed him into a popular icon. And that's really the recording that vaulted his work into the stratosphere and beyond. But popularity has its perils. I've also written books about Isaac Albéniz and great composer of operetta, Federico Moreno Torroba. And they suffered a similar fate. The net effect of this has been to eclipse his vast and varied output of works other than those for the guitar. And I say this as a guitarist, and my distinguished co-author is a guitarist, and, you know, but there is life beyond the guitar. It's hard to believe that sometimes. Isaac Albéniz's so-called Leyenda Asturias is a piano piece usually heard in guitar transcription. Now here again, I'll tell people I've written a book about Albéniz and I just get blank stares. And then I'll go, daga digga 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 digga. Oh yeah, that guy? Oh really, that's cool. That was also featured in a car commercial years ago with Manuel Barroico playing it in the back seat of a car to demonstrate the quietness of the ride. And it most famously incarnated, the Doors made a recording in 1968 of a piece they called Spanish Caravan. And this was the basis of that. Now, nobody recognizes the name Albéniz, but they sure recognize that meme. And it tends to put in the shade everything else the guy did. Federico Moreno Torroba's great lament in life was that he composed this runaway hit, Luisa Fernanda, which premiered in 1932. It's been performed almost 20,000 times. But he composed about 70 stage works, and he lamented the fact that others of his operettas, his zarzuelas, like Monte Carmelo of 1939 or La Chulapona of 1934, didn't get nearly as much attention as Luisa Fernanda, but he thought they were as good or better. So this is the difficulty that Rodrigo has also faced. There are many facets to Rodrigo as a creative artist, and we can view his music through multiple lenses, including literary, folkloric, virtuosic, sacred, historical, theatrical, and descriptive. He loved literature, wrote a lot of works utilizing poems by famous poets, and I hasten to point out among my favorite songs by Rodrigo, Con Antonio Machado. Machado was one of the greatest poets of the modern era in Spain, and personally my favorite. He was born in the same year that Carmen premiered, 1875, and he died in 1939, the year that the Civil War ended. He was in exile in southern France, and so this is also the 80th anniversary, not only of the Aranjuez's composition, but also the death of Antonio Machado. Rodrigo is powerfully drawn to Spanish folklore. I think that's fairly obvious. But there are many regions in Spain, and each has its distinctive costumes and customs and instruments and melodies and rhythms. The music of Galicia, of Asturias, of the Basque Country has nothing to do with flamenco at all. But he was familiar with these different styles and evoked them in his music. We could also point out, after the Aranjuez, there was a profusion of great concertos by him, not just for the guitar, although he composed several other very important guitar concertos, but he also wrote for mainstream orchestral instruments, piano, flute, harp, violin, and cello.
We can talk a bit
Yes.
about his style for piano, because it's very
Let's do
characteristic,
that,
and
yes.
I believe,
Good.
Dr. Riva, you can give us an insight on Rodrigo's piano style.
Well, of course, you've already had the opportunity to hear his brilliant natural technique. And certainly through the history of music, there have been many brilliant pianists who were also composers, or you could also say many brilliant composers who were also pianists. Many examples come to mind, like Mozart, or Liszt, or Chopin, or in the 20th century, Rachmaninoff, for example. But Rodrigo never pursued a career as a soloist. He was a born pianist. He had a completely natural and ease and natural technical ease at the keyboard. And that technique allowed him to compose for the piano in complete freedom. But it was really more important than that. His knowledge of previous Spanish keyboard music gave him a really unique perspective that helped him create his own unique style. Rodrigo commented that in the 19th century, the piano was very important in expressing the emotional needs of musicians, and in the piano they found the perfect instrument and the perfect vehicle for expressing those emotions. He added, however, for various reasons, Spain did not have the same connection to the piano until later. He rather harshly dismissed almost all the piano music composed during the first 80 years of the 19th century as not having any real value. He considered that only after 1880 were Spanish works of true value being composed. And of course, Rodrigo was acutely aware that during the final decade of the 19th century, Enrique Granados was the composer who gave Spain a glorious period of late Romantic piano masterpieces. Granados' keyboard writing, while distinctive and firmly rooted in the pianistic style developed during the last half of the 19th century, did not define a new type of piano technique, as do the piano works of Liszt, Albéniz, or Debussy. But Rodrigo was not by nature a romantic composer. He was modern and forward-looking as well. Thus, Rodrigo was deeply impressed by Albéniz's suite Iberia, which he described as being of supreme importance internationally for the piano and the richest music written for the Spanish piano. In Iberia, Albéniz created an entirely new and modern concept of piano music with dense and highly complex pianistic textures and modern harmonies, which demanded new and highly developed techniques for the pianist who wished to interpret this glorious music. And as Rodrigo neither wanted to follow in the footsteps of the Romantic period, nor to be a follower of Albéniz, he found that he faced a difficult problem in writing for the piano, saying, on the one hand, there's this tremendous suite, Iberia, and on the other hand, the great music of Debussy and Ravel, making it very hard for all composers to find a personal voice in writing piano music. Thus, Rodrigo was inspired to create a distinct 20th century piano style, based on what he described as elimination, leading, in his words, to much smaller and clearer textures. To use a word popular today, some might say he deconstructed the music that preceded him. In order to avoid what he described as the magnificent Albéniz piano, he sought inspiration in the sonatas composed by Domenico Scarlatti during the many years that he lived in Spain. The clear textures, keyboard antics, and virtuosity of Scarlatti's sonatas had a profound influence on Rodrigo's music, as did the vast expressive and technical potential of the pianos manufactured in the 20th century. Rodrigo's highly distinctive piano works require a flexible, refined, and virtuoso piano technique. Often the textures are two-voiced, and just as in Scarlatti and Mozart, there may not be a profusion of notes, but every note is important. The demands he places on pianists are guided by his almost limitless imagination, which created a musical world where anything was possible. Anything can come up at any moment. His music is completely different from virtuoso works such as the etudes by Chopin or Liszt, which tend to concentrate on one particular technical difficulty, and they require great stamina for performance. However, in Rodrigo's piano works, the pianist needs to be prepared for sometimes numerous technical challenges in order to follow the path in the music to which his limitless imagination leads us. Al'ombra de Torre Bermeja, In the Shadow of Torre Bermeja, is an emblematic work by Rodrigo for several highly interesting and unusual reasons. A number of composers were writing pieces as an homage to the memory of the great Spanish pianist Ricardo Viñes, who premiered numerous compositions by Debussy and Ravel, as well as many Spanish composers. Rodrigo was inspired to base his contribution to the homage on a work that Viñes especially enjoyed performing, Torre Bermeja by Isaac Albéniz. Rather curiously, Torre Bermeja is one of the least successful of Albéniz's early piano works. Some of them, such as Córdoba or Granada, are highly effective, and this one is a little bit less effective, except it sounds absolutely phenomenal when transcribed for the guitar.
Quite true.
I never play it on the piano. In any case, Rodrigo decided to make his homage to Viñes into something of an intellectual exercise by composing a kind of commentary or paraphrase of Albéniz's Torre Bermeja. There is not a note of Albéniz in the music. Instead, Rodrigo was inspired by the atmosphere of the Albéniz piece. He stated that the somewhat curious title, partly in French and partly in Spanish, recalls that Albéniz had used similar titles on occasion. Although I have not personally verified this claim, it certainly is very intriguing. I would like you to hear a portion of this wonderful music of himself playing it, and it gives you an idea of his fabulous ease, but also that he could create such an intellectually based piece, and yet it sounds completely natural and expressive. I'm sure you can all appreciate the gracefulness and the elegance of this kind of keyboard writing, to say nothing of the brilliant coloration that his music and the piano give to his creations.
Absolutely. And I think you pointed out two very important elements, or many important elements. One of them, of course, the clarity, the importance of every single note, that each of them has a meaning. But also this use of textures that sometimes they even imitate the guitar, and this leads to the next question here, which is, what was the impact of Rodrigo in the guitar language? How did he affect the technique? We've seen the Concierto Aranjuez, but there are many other solo pieces for guitar. How did he construct his own musical language for the guitar, and how did he impact the technique specifically?
well, it's a difficult question. Yes. Rodrigo's guitar music is the cornerstone of 20th century guitar repertoire, and it is extremely demanding in terms of instrumental technique. When in 1939 Rodrigo gave the guitarists the miracle of his Concierto Aranjuez, he placed on the table a major challenge that helped to enormously widen the guitar technique. I've always thought that if Andrés de Segovia, the greatest guitarist of his time, refused to play this work because he never played Concierto Aranjuez, it was because he didn't want to undertake this challenge. Virtuosity was a feature of all Rodrigo's music, same piano as choir or orchestra or violin, of course, guitar too. Something that he never renounced. Leaving apart the Concierto Aranjuez, the two biggest and greatest solo guitar pieces, namely Invocación y Danza and Toccata, were written way before any guitarist could play them. Rodrigo probably wrote Invocación y Danza around the mid-40s as a tribute to Manuel de Falla's death in 1946. But after finishing it, he kept this work in a drawer and practically forgot about it until 1961, when he submitted it to an international competition in France of guitar music, of course, that he won. Then the piece was premiered in 1962 by the greatest virtuoso of that time, that was Alirio Díaz, in a slightly simplified version. So it took 15 years for Invocación y Danza to find its way to the concert halls. And 15 years is nothing, or is an insignificant delay in comparison with that of the Toccata that he wrote for the guitar in 1933. It was so beyond the technical capabilities of the guitarists of that time, of the time of Rodrigo, that Rodrigo himself considered it as an unplayable failure. And he reused the music as the first movement of his Concierto d'Estío for violin and orchestra. The original version was forgotten until a copy was found in 2006 in the music collection of the guitarist who premiered the Concierto Aranjuez, Regino Sainz de la Maza. Since then, this piece became a capolavoro of guitar repertoire. More than 70 years after its composition, there are still few guitarists skillful enough to play this piece, and no one plays it at the crazy speed required by Rodrigo. One of the last one who added this piece to his repertoire and played faster than most of the others was a young American guitarist called Javier Jara, born in Minnesota, in 1993, who won in 2016 the Guitar Foundation of America International Competition, playing the toccata. I would like to share with you the beginning and the end of this outstanding performance. This is the only single creature on Earth capable to play. It's called Xavier with an X and Jara, J-A-R-A.
Xavier Jara.
And he's born in Minnesota.
In 1993.
1990.
So,
I mean, he's amazing.
definitely, and this points out to the relevance of the performers in Rodrigo music and the collaboration of Rodrigo with several performers during his lifetime, which was essential in the creation of his music. Cecilia Rodrigo a lot of times tells how his father will meet, let's say, a great flutist and will write a concerto for this great flutist. So we'll meet a very excellent pianist and we'll write a piece for this pianist. So we're going to see actually one of these collaborations with cellist Joyd Weber. So one of these collaborations, a very well-known collaboration was with the Romeros,
Yes.
this family of guitarists. And since you studied them in depth, maybe you can tell us a little about that.
Yes, I took my first lesson with Pepe Romero in January of 1976, and I've known them for over 40 years, and recently published a book about the Romero family. It's an extraordinary musical dynasty. They had a very close personal and professional relationship with Rodrigo. He composed his last guitar concerto, Concierto para una Fiesta, which is almost impossible to play. He composed that for Pepe, who premiered it in 1983. It's interesting, he said about this concerto, he said to Pepe, he said, look, one day, everybody dies. One day we'll be up in heaven and we can look down at all those poor bastards trying to play this piece. That's a great anecdote and true. I got it from the horse's mouth. But what's interesting is that the Romeros basically created the idea of a guitar quartet. That hadn't existed before, and they created it in 1960, 3 years after coming to the United States from Spain. And they had to create a new repertoire for this ensemble. They were particularly interested in collaborating with orchestras. So Celedonio, the father, contacted Joaquín Rodrigo and suggested to him that he compose a concerto for 4 guitars and orchestra. Rodrigo warmed up to the idea very quickly and composed his Concierto Andaluz, his Andalusian concerto, which premiered in 1967 and has been the Romeros have recorded it twice actually, and it's a terrific piece. I should also point out that Rodrigo composed a magnificent concerto for 2 guitars and orchestra called the Concierto Madrigal. He composed it for Ida Presti and Alexander Lagoya, a great duo of the earlier 20th century. They never performed it. It was premiered by Pepe Ángel Romero, who recorded it, and I think in a definitive fashion. I also hasten to point out that it was Ángel Romero who gave the West Coast premiere of the Aranjuez with the Los Angeles Philharmonic at the Hollywood Bowl, 1964, when Ángel was all of 18 years old. Mm-hmm. So they've both performed and recorded all of the guitar concertos of Rodrigo, including the Fantasía para un gentil hombre. So they have had a long and very fruitful personal and professional relationship with Rodrigo and transformed the guitar repertoire in the process.
And I think this collaboration also evidences not only this personal connection, but also the presence of Rodrigo in the United States. So as we all know, this institute, this observatory is dedicated to these exchanges between the United States and Spain. And I think the figure of Rodrigo is extremely important on that regard. So maybe we can talk a bit about that, about the presence of Rodrigo in the United States. There's actually one work that I believe is very paradigmatic of this, which is In Search of the Beyond. Maybe we can discuss this a little bit more in depth, but yeah, let's try to contextualize Rodrigo's presence in the United States. Maybe Dr. Clark or Dr. Suárez-Pajares.
Well, I'll yield to my...
Well, in the 50s, in Spain, a new generation of composers took power. They had the support of the cultural authorities and reacted naturally against the previous generation, represented especially by Rodrigo. However, precisely at the same time, after so many years of isolation, Spain was readmitted in the leading international organizations and resumed its diplomatic relations with the Western countries. The Concierto Aranjuez then started to be worldwide known after it was performed in Paris by Narciso Yepes and the Spanish National Orchestra, conducted by Ataulfo Argenta, and in 1960, broke the Concierto Aranjuez the borders of popular music through the version of Miles Davis, released in his 1960 long play Sketches of Spain that we have listened to. Then, while Rodrigo found many doors closed in his own country, he found many others opened everywhere else, especially in the United States, but also in England. In the United States, through his relationship with the family Romero, but also before with his stay in Cape Canaveral and his relationship with the Houston Orchestra, but even before with a beautiful piece which is called Adagio for wind instruments. So there are many instances, also the Romero family, but you to introduce the In Search of the Beyond.
Yes,
Which is-
well, tú eres el experto, en mi opinion. I should point out something that Javier and I have discussed at various times. It was Andres Segovia. He refused to play the Aranjuez because he was somewhat offended that someone else had given the premiere of it. So Rodrigo, to patch things up, composed his Fantasía para un gentil hombre, and which Segovia premiered in San Francisco in 1958. But there's something you have to understand about that date, 1958, 1 year after the Romeros arrived in the United States. And that is that the 1950s were the decade of Spain's rehabilitation. Why? The United States opened the way for it to receive aid from the International Monetary Fund, and the United States itself gave it economic assistance, established military bases in Spain. In 1959, Dwight D. Eisenhower became the first U.S. president ever to visit Spain. And when he landed and got off the plane, Franco was there to hug him, to greet him. And this was a somewhat controversial relationship, but we have to understand it in the context of the Cold War. You can't understand any of this outside that context. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay, maybe you were a friend of Hitler and Mussolini. We're going to forget that because now you're the enemy of Stalin and Khrushchev. And so you're our friend now. And we have to, and so these Spanish artists actually came to the United States. It was partly a goodwill gesture to stimulate sympathy for Spanish culture and stimulate tourism, which it did. And so it's a very important phenomenon that this was a period of a rapprochement between Spain and the United States. And we worked very hard to stimulate the Spanish economy and to promote Spanish culture and tourism, and it worked like a charm.
Yeah, and I think
Now,
it's-
this, oh, well, okay, so,
yeah, so that's a very important political aspect
political
of
point,
it. So
yes.
the Pactos de Madrid in 1953, but also with admittance of Spain in the United Nations in 1955.
absolutely.
But also it has this cultural component, as you were pointing out so well. In the visual arts, we see this exhibition of abstract Spanish art happening at the MoMA in that same decade, but also the arrival of American music and artists to Spain in the 1950s. So, of course, Dr. Riva, you've been studying Granados, so that arrival of Spanish music already happened before, and we've seen the premiere of the Goyescas, but how was it intensified maybe this period? What would you say
Well,
was the difference?
one of there certainly there had been a long presence of Spanish artists and musicians in the United States from the 20s on, and there were, granted, there was the premiere of Goyescas at Granados' famous opera at the Metropolitan Opera House, which is the first and to this day the only opera sung in Spanish at the Metropolitan. It's quite something remarkable. But after this time, there was with this breaking down of the new political life, there came to be a whole new interest in promoting Spanish artists, and somebody like Alicia de la Rocha gave her first concert in 1963, playing the Noches en los Jardines de España by Manuel de Falla at the Hollywood Bowl. I mean, that must have been quite a spectacular event. And of course, she went on to have the major part of her career took place in the United States. And this is but one example. Certainly, Segovia had been here for a very long time, and Casals had been here performing for a very long time. And for example, there was the famous Casals concert at the White House in the 60s. And so it was viewed as glamorous too.
Yeah.
And certainly this was a sound of music that people didn't know here, and it was something absolutely wonderful. And I can't resist pointing out that one of the great Spanish concerts of the 20th century took place with Victoria de los Angeles and Alicia de la Rocha performing at Hunter College. And it was has to have been one of the concerts of the century. It was a remarkable.
That is perfect. Yes, there was this tidal wave of interest in Spanish culture, and think of all the Spanish musicians who came to the United States. Sabicas, Montoya. I grew up listening to the recordings of flamenco guitarist Carlos Montoya. And there was Sabicas and Juan Serrano and the Romeros. I mean, it was just a tidal wave of love of Spanish stuff. The interesting thing is Rodrigo traveled the United States. He visited the United States. He went to NASA. And he was fascinated with outer space and, and astronauts. He got to meet some astronauts and so on.
Touch the
And touch the moon rocks. And so he composed a piece that demonstrates something Javier was saying earlier, that there's a very progressive modernist side to Rodrigo. He could compose music in a very avant-garde style if he chose to. He could compose in any style if he chose to, but he had to have a good reason to do it. And we're going to listen now to a little bit of the symphonic work he composed inspired by his trip to NASA, A la busca del más allá, In Search of the Beyond, which is basically his conception of outer space and the exploration of outer space.
It's like the creation, the chaos in
Yeah,
Haydn's
yeah,
creation.
you're right. Exactly.
So
It's like the chaos in Haydn's creation. Exactly.
Incredible representation
And then it
of chaos.
coalesces into
And
something.
then once that the chaos dissolves or fades, appears a magnificent melody of music, which is a slow motion version of one of the themes of Concierto for guitars, of Concierto Andaluz,
Ah.
which was also his concerto for the family, for the Romero family. So it appears after the chaos.
And again, we should always keep in mind that Rodrigo was blind, so he never saw this image, for example. So this is an important thing to always.
And yet he captures the essence of it.
Yes. Surely we've all seen enough images of outer space that when that happens, you can easily picture the images of what the astronauts would have seen as they are orbiting the Earth for the first time, or
Yeah, it's amazing.
approaching the moon. It's incredible.
So we see how Rodrigo's inspiration comes from very different fronts, from poetry, from the outer space. Also from different cultures too, right? So we sometimes think about the nationalism of Rodrigo, but there are other influences also in his music, right?
He had very Catholic interests, and I use the word Catholic with a small c, meaning universal, kind of world-embracing interests. Had a phenomenal curiosity about the world, and fortunately, he could have people read to him, or he could read literature himself, reading Braille. And he had a great interest in other religions. He'd married a Sephardic Jew, was very receptive to and interested in the Jewish religion because of its historic connection, significance in Spain. And so, especially in his sacred works, he didn't compose the sort of traditional things you would expect. There is no Mass by Rodrigo, there's no Requiem, there's no Te Deum. He composed an early Ave Maria, that was it. His sacred works are more spiritual in their orientation and very idiosyncratic in his choice of texts and drawing on both Christian and Jewish traditions, as one can see here. Especially, my personal favorite is the Himnos de los Neófitos de Qumran, which is, these are texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls that Vicky then translated into Spanish and he set to music, and they are extraordinary. I don't know how much you know about Qumran, but it was a community of Essenes. These were Messianic Jews who believed that the end times were coming, active around the time of Jesus, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, were discovered, and then she translated them and he set them to music. It's just amazing music, and again, not at all Rodrigo, actually very modernistic sounding.
We also have the impact of history or past periods in his music, of course.
He was fascinated by history and by the history of his own country in particular, and this often provided inspiration for works. He was so he came of age as a composer during the 1920s and 30s, and one of the dominant movements at that time was something called neoclassicism, which was centered in France, but initiated by Stravinsky, active in France. Basically a rejection of the sort of Austro-Germanic tradition of the late Romantic. They wanted to retreat back, in a sense, looking for inspiration before 1800, but using a modern harmonic language. So works like the Homenaje a un viejo clavicordio, Tres viejos aires de danza, the villancicos, my personal favorite because it was his first guitar piece, and it's been arranged for piano and orchestra, with the Sarabanda Lejana, the distant Saravan. The Fantasia we've already talked about, the Concierto Madrigal. All of these things display his passionate interest in the past, but always understood, interpreted in a very modern fashion, with a modern sensibility and modern understanding. That he was always au courant. He was a man of his time. Extraordinary.
Yeah, and his imagination
Yes.
was simply incredible, because you think about it, he composed music for theater and for movies. So here you have, for instance, Sol Intrépida, which is a film score, or El Hijo Fingido, which is a zarzuela, right?
Yes, someone the other day asked this question. How is it possible that a blind person could write a movie score? Well, we're not talking about any ordinary blind person. We're talking about Rodrigo. And he loved the theater. I mean, he lamented the fact that he couldn't see what was happening on stage, but he could imagine it. And he loved going to the theater and reading theater in Braille, or theatrical works, dramatic works in Braille. So he collaborated with Moreno Torroba on a zarzuela, El Duende Azul, and then wrote another wonderful work, El Hijo Fingido, composed a ballet, Havana Real, which is a beautiful work. And then during the 50s, he was writing film scores. In 1952, Sol Intrépida. I've become convinced that there really wasn't anything he couldn't do, that he set his mind to.
He could definitely describe, and a lot of his music was really, it seems that it's
Very descriptive
of the world around him.
He loved the song of the cuckoo. It comes back time and again in his works. He sneaks it in. Cuckoo, cuckoo. the Sones en la Giralda, that magnificent minaret, and it became a bell tower in Sevilla. He was actually born in Sagunto, which is north of Valencia, and has a long history dating back at least to Roman times. And so he was inspired by all kinds of things. I think one of the most humorous works is this grand march of the assistant secretaries or some of the bureaucrats, the grand march of the bureaucrats. I mean, he had this irrepressible sense of humor, and I suppose, given the obstacles and the problems he faced, that that was absolutely necessary for his survival. He had to have the ability to appreciate the humorous aspects of his condition and of life in general.
So we talked about Rodrigo's early period, we talked a little bit about the middle period and the influence of his presence in the United States. Let's go to his last works, maybe, Dr. Suárez-Pajares. What are the characteristics of his last pieces?
Well, this is a compendium of all his previous works, and we can find many times many cross references, many intertextuality in his works. It's something that appears in the best composers. Many times, like as we have seen in the Busca del Más Allá, appears something that is his own music in within another different works. But the last year of his creative activity, the 1982, he composed, apart from this concerto for the future guitarist that can be able to prevail for this extraordinary difficulties that he wrote. A part of this Concierto para una Fiesta, he wrote a big work. It was over 15 minutes for orchestra and choir, which is titled Cántico de San Francisco de Asís, and two other important chamber works for piano and violin, 7 Valencian songs, and for violin and guitar, Serenata al alba del día. So if we just have to underline one of his last works, we can choose the Serenata al alba del día today. Right? I made a cut of the this
Yeah, we
last
also
bit.
have the 7 canciones
Yeah,
valencianas.
at the end. Something that we all agree to. This is 7 canciones valencianas,
Yes.
but before the other one. Come on. And we leave this one for the end. Oh, yes.
Well, I find the other one. Maybe we perhaps can talk about another aspect. So we talked about the performance aspect of Rodrigo. We talked about the research, and probably since all of us either have taught or teaching at university, perhaps we can talk about the pedagogical aspect of these works. Why is Rodrigo relevant in the pedagogy? Why should we teach Rodrigo? Should we learn Rodrigo's works? For instance, Dr. Riva, maybe you can shed some light on this.
One of the most unusual aspects of Rodrigo's pedagogical works is that he wrote works for children to play and that expressed childhood emotions. And many composers, of course, have written pieces about childhood, like the Schumann Kinderszenen or Granados' Cuentos de la Juventud, but these are not works intended for children to play. They're adult nostalgic recollections of their youth. But Rodrigo wrote pieces that were literally for children to play, and that talked about their going to school and getting up in the morning and things that were part of their regular day. But beyond that, his works have a certain kind of language that at any level that is certainly very important for all kinds of students, and whatever their instrument is that they play. They don't have to just play the piano or the guitar. There are many other things that they can be studying. But they need to learn this kind of musical language that's modern, and the clarity of it that's necessary. I think it's very, very important. And the one other thing that I think is very important is that his piano works in particular have not been integrated widely into concert repertoire. And I think it's very surprising that in the round of international competitions, of which there are so many, why pianists do not play these pieces. They're virtuosic pieces, and it's something new. And everybody is looking for a new thing today. Well, Rodrigo has a huge catalog of all kinds of different works that are just waiting to be premiered, not premiered, but to be made known to the public. And if any performers are out there, this is your opportunity.
He loved teaching. He taught he was the first music teacher in the University Complutense de Madrid, and he held this position till his retirement in 1976. So he kept teaching in graduate and also in doctorate courses. So he always liked it a lot. Devoted a lot of effort to teaching.
So let's listen to this.
His last major work for guitar and for chamber guitar and is Serenata al alba del día. Is serenade to the dawn instead of being to the sunset of his life. And it's amazing this idea. And also his last collection of Valencian songs. It's a very interesting arrangement of folk or popular melodies from Valencia for violin and piano.
And these would have been songs that he heard as a youth, so it's recalling his past. And in this wonderful performance, they're performed by his son-in-law.
Agustín León era fantastic.
Wonderful.
Yeah, he encouraged him to do this last composition.
So with this, we would like to open the floor for your questions now. Any questions for our wonderful panelists?
I actually have a question. Maybe some of you have. What is his presence in the new media, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube? Did you YouTube him and Spotify him, and is like, is it amazing or middle or
There's
low?
a lot of stuff there.
A lot.
There's a lot.
A lot.
Mostly guitar, but that's okay. Start somewhere.
To start someplace.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely again for the arrangements that they've been done, especially of the Concierto Aranjuez, as you can find
Yes,
thousands of very
Infinite
different
numbers.
genres, right? So,
it's phenomenal of Western
something.
culture.
No.
if there are no any other questions, we're going to make a very big announcement. I
Oh, okay,
believe,
thank you.
by Dr. Clark.
So, at the University of California, Riverside, I'm the founder and director of the Center for Iberian and Latin American Music. And we have 6 faculty and 4 lecturers and 3 music ensembles who are devoted to the exploration of this vast musical heritage. I will be retiring before long, and my concern is that when I leave, they will not hire a Spanish specialist to replace me. And so what I've sought to do is to establish an endowed chair. Somebody who will be a specialist in Spanish music and culture. And I could think of no better name to attach to this chair than that of Joaquín and Victoria Rodrigo. So the Rodrigo Foundation, Cecilia Rodrigo, are the founding donors. Give the initial donation to establish this fund. I've contributed some of my own money. And I'm hoping then that when I retire, I'll be succeeded by someone who will be the Rodrigo Scholar and will perpetuate, I think, a fairly strong tradition of Spanish musicology that we've begun at UC Riverside. Now, it may seem fairly shameless, but this can't happen without financial support. So, if you're so inclined to contribute any amount to this effort that is initiated by Cecilia Rodrigo and going to be continued by others, I hope, I have some envelopes and forms here, and anything would be appreciated to help establish this chair and perpetuate not only the study of Spanish music in American academia. It would be the only chair in the Western Hemisphere devoted to the study of Spanish music and culture, and the only chair anywhere that I know of, at least, dedicated to Rodrigo, and named in his honor. So if you're interested in contributing to that initiative, then here are the forms.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I ask for another round of applause to our wonderful panelists tonight. The fantastic performers, Ana Tonali. I want to thank you again, Marta and Victoria and the Instituto for hosting us. It was a true honor. And thank you everyone for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And un aplauso para Isabel por organizar.